The world has witnessed many great kings and emperors whose dominion at times extended across continents. So much so that when we think about kings, the first thing that comes to our mind is majesty. However, when we look at our Lord Jesus Christ on the cross, we see a different picture altogether. We see a mangled body. Instead of being clothed with the finest silk as an earthly king would rightly be, his body is adorned with wounds. Instead of being crowned with a crown of the finest gold and precious jewels, he bears a crown of thorns. Instead of holding a scepter of power, he is given a stick to be ridiculed. Considering all this, how can our Lord Jesus Christ be called a king? Can there be a more adverse and hate-filled situation than the crucifixion? Can there be a greater contradiction? One who is king is condemned to death. A complete desolation in order to proclaim one's royalty? By demonstrating this apparent paradox, the sacred scriptures introduce us to a profound and adorable mystery. Precisely because he is the God-made man, Jesus is the King of history and all its events. Everything takes place according to his most holy and almighty will. Thus, he utters those words of profound strength and sublime majesty when threatened by Pilate. You would have no power over me unless it were given you from above. He is the supreme author of all the events of history, and everything is under his regal dominion. But how can we see this majesty in our Lord Jesus Christ, who did not live on earth as a king? He was the son of a poor carpenter, Saint Joseph, who albeit was of the lineage of David. Jesus' royal greatness shone in more than one episode of his life, but it shone in the most spectacular way at the Transfiguration on Mount Tabor, where all his majesty appeared simultaneously as king and above all as God. Doctors of the church and scholars unanimously propose that this was in fact how our Lord Jesus Christ's human body would have actually looked, and this is how he appeared after his resurrection in his glorious body. In taking the form of one of us and laying aside his external and apparent glory, our Lord performed what is known as a negative miracle, where he hid his divinity from men. He lived like us in all things except sin. He even laid aside his glory out of love for us. Thus, as he sipped to the last drop the cup of all possible sorrows and humiliations, he knew that each one of these torments would be the object of adoration for all the centuries to come, and there would come a day when the greatest monarchs of the earth would argue among themselves as to who would have the honor of having embedded in their scepter a tiny fragment of the reed of wrath used in the Passion. Even the crown of thorns would be so venerated by great Catholic monarchs that one of the greatest kings of Christendom, Saint Louis IX, would have Sainte-Chapelle de Paris built exclusively to house this priceless relic. That is why, from the depths of his pain and abandonment, Jesus possessed majesty, a majesty of certainty of the victory that was to come. When Dr. Plinio, our founder, was still very young, he admired this mysterious majesty that he contemplated in an image of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Jesus seemed so majestic, he said, and at the same time so good, so infinitely superior to me and so merciful that I said, "That is majesty. How I love that majesty." And he added, "When I came across the litany of the Sacred Heart of Jesus with the invocation, Cor Jesu, Majestatis Infinite, Miserere Nobis, Heart of Jesus, of infinite majesty, have mercy on us, I adopted it and inscribed it among my favorite invocations because it was something truly magnificent. This balance between majesty and goodness enchanted me, giving me the idea that the highest and fullest standard of majesty was Jesus Christ. And since he was Rex Regnum et Dominus Dominatium, King of kings and Lord of lords, it was natural that majesty of such elevation and such perfection be found in him alone. The kingship of our Lord Jesus Christ can be illustrated by three fundamental reasons. He is king by nature, by conquest, and by inheritance. A king of a particular region must share the same nature as the people whom he governs. Only then he can understand the struggles proper to his people and govern them with fairness and mercy. It is obvious that only a man can be a rightful king of other men. When our Lord Jesus Christ came into the world, he took upon himself our human nature without giving up his divine nature, becoming a perfect man. He endured pain, hunger, thirst, and every suffering that a man may face, but taken to its extreme. Therefore, in him, the two natures, the human nature and the divine nature, were united in what the Church calls a hypostatic union. Since Jesus is truly man and truly God, he is our rightful king. Secondly, our Lord Jesus Christ is king by conquest. History is filled with great battles and conquests by great men who gained dominion over territories by their heroism and valor. Can this not also be applied to our blessed Lord? He is the apex of heroism, and by shedding his blood for us on Mount Calvary, he conquered us from the clutches of sin and the devil and gained complete dominion over us. Thirdly, a king is one who has supreme authority over his people, an authority he inherits from his Father. Our Lord himself speaks of his kingly authority in his last discourse about the rewards and punishments that will be the eternal lot of the just and the damned. He also manifestly says in his reply to Pilate, "I am a king," after his resurrection, when giving his apostles the mission of teaching and baptizing all nations. He takes the opportunity to call himself king and solemnly proclaimed that all power was given him in heaven and on earth. These words can only be taken to indicate the greatness of his power and the infinite extent of his kingdom. Saint John even writes in his Apocalypse, "The Prince of the kings of the earth, who has on his garment and on his thigh written, King of kings and Lord of lords." Our Lord Jesus Christ has inherited supreme authority over every created thing from the Father. It is Christ whom the Father has appointed as heir of all things, says St. Paul in his letter to the Hebrews. For he must reign until at the end of the world he hath put all his enemies under the feet of God the Father. Indeed, he will reign until the end of time, and his second coming will be full of glory and splendor. But as we come to the end of this liturgical year with the feast of Christ the King, the Holy Mother Church reminds us of those words of caution uttered by our Lord Jesus Christ. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? Let us ask ourselves this same question. When the King comes in all his glory, will he find us watchful and praying? Or will he find us fast asleep, inebriated with the pleasures and riches of this world?